Hi, Alison Marsden here from Gardening by Design. Welcome to this box of tricks topic. I do hope that you enjoy using it to help you become a more confident gardener. Please let me know how you get on, and happy gardening.
Pruning small trees and shrubs. Part 1. What is pruning? Pruning is probably the topic that comes up most frequently in my talks or Q&A sessions, and many otherwise confident gardeners hesitate or even avoid pruning altogether, which is never a good thing. It is almost regarded as a dark art, and certainly very hit and miss. But as with so many gardening skills, it is really a mix of science and artistry. Once you understand the theory, you have free rein to be creative. And there is no mystery to pruning at all. Come on, let's get started. You are going to need the answers to two fundamental questions before you get anywhere near the cutting tools. Be clear on what you want to achieve. Why are you pruning this particular plant right now? And understand how plants react to pruning. Plants are living organisms and they will react to your intervention. We'll look at these two cornerstones of pruning in more detail now. The first cornerstone is simply knowing why you are standing out there in the garden secateurs in hand. You need to be absolutely clear on what you want the end result to be. In fact, the first question I always ask a would-be pruner is why they want to prune one of their trees and shrubs. And there are two common answers. To produce fruit on a fruit tree or bush, of course, or to make it fit into the space where a shrub is growing into the next plant. Well, both these reasons need a little refining before they can help you prune anything successfully. Think about the first answer and what happens to damson trees out in the hedgerow or apple trees in a neglected orchard. They both happily produce fruit year after year without any human intervention, so we may want to prune them, but clearly we don't need to prune them just to get the tree to fruit. And with the second answer, if you are repeatedly cutting back a shrub to make it fit between two other plants in your border, then maybe, just maybe, it's the wrong space for that plant. I should say that there is nothing wrong with controlling the size of a shrub when it reaches maturity, but that is different from trying to squeeze a quart into a pint pot in your border. So think about the individual trees and shrubs that you want to prune in your garden. I am assuming that that is why you're watching this video. And while the birds twitter, decide exactly what you want the end result to be, why you might prune any shrub at any time in its life. And then we'll compare notes. Ready? My answer is that there are two and only two reasons to prune something. To encourage a plant to grow, flower or fruit as the gardener wants it by changing how the plant would naturally grow. That means changing the shape into something more artistic, or shorter so that we can reach and pick the fruit without ladders, to have more fruit and flowers in the same space, or the opposite, fewer flowers but bigger ones. And the second reason is to renovate an overgrown plant, removing much of the top growth so the plant is reshaped or simply starts again. The fact that I have grouped all the regular pruning together in the top box doesn't mean that all trees and shrubs are pruned the same way at the same time, whatever the object. The point here is that the vast majority of the time we are pruning for our benefit and not because the plant needs it. So we have established that when you are facing a specific plant to prune, you have to have a clear objective in mind. For example, do you want to encourage growth or reduce it? Pruning only gets complicated when you're not clear on what you're trying to do. And to help with this, I have listed 6 ways that we can prune shrubs and small trees at different times in their life, and we'll look at them one at a time. Firstly comes housekeeping. This maintains the health of the plant even if you're not intending to alter the shape or size. Once a year, remove dead or damaged wood and any branches that cross and rub or congest the centre of the shrub. Formation pruning takes place in the first few years after planting to create a balanced, open and airy framework allowing light to the centre. This is always done for fruit trees, and it can be useful for ornamentals too. Raising the canopy means removing the lowest side branches to give a clear trunk on a small tree, and it's equally suitable for a shrub with multiple stems. Stabilisation pruning is used once a shrub reaches the size you want, so that it just grows back to the same size each year without loss of flowers. Recovery pruning addresses overgrown and tangled shrubs to thin out and shorten the stems, to open out the centre and improve the overall shape. Regeneration is the most drastic form of pruning, by cutting almost to the ground or right back to the trunk and basically starting again. And so let's summarise cornerstone 1. There are 2 different reasons to prune: to change the natural shape or to renovate a neglected plant. Within this, there are 6 ways to prune, depending on the changes that you want to make to the plant at the time. And of course, it is vital that you are clear on what you are trying to achieve when you are facing a plant with a pair of secateurs. The second cornerstone of pruning is to understand how plants react. Plants are living organisms, and external actions can trigger a response. To understand what happens when you cut a plant back, we need to look at how plants grow. This explanation is slightly scientific, but it's very simplified, and I promise that it will help you to make the right pruning decisions when you get out into your garden. Let's break it down into 3 smaller questions and then work through the explanations one at a time. Firstly, if you understand how plants grow, you can see how they survive pruning. Secondly, we'll look at what triggers plant regrowth and how you can influence it. And thirdly, it's important to understand how far back or low down you can cut and still have the plant survive. The first point to appreciate is that there are 2 different ways that plants grow, depending on the type. Grasses and similar plants with no stem and a cluster of strappy leaves emerging from the ground have the growing point at the base. So the tip of the leaf is the oldest material, and new cells form at the bottom and push it upwards. When we mow the lawn, a bit like when we cut our own hair, the growing point of the plant isn't affected, and the grass just keeps growing and we just keep mowing all summer. But this topic is supposed to be about pruning trees and shrubs. Well, I'm getting to those. The second type of plant covers those with a stem or branch structure, either herbaceous perennials like these heleniums, or trees and shrubs that we are really interested in, like this hibiscus. Here, the active growing point of each stem or twig is right at the tip. At the end of each stem in winter, you will see a bud that will develop into a shoot in spring, grow on through the summer, lengthening the stem and taking the growing point upwards. By the time the plant goes dormant in autumn, there will be 1 year's extension growth and a new bud at the end. You can clearly see on the detail of this Amelanchier the large growing bud at the top and smaller, thinner leaf buds down each stem. This is important to understand because when you cut back a shrub, unlike mowing the grass, you do in fact remove the growing point. So unless the plant can react to this in some way, it cannot continue to grow. Of course, plants have not evolved expecting you to come along with a pair of secateurs, but they have evolved with the tops being regularly browsed off by goats or elephants appropriately. And therefore they are able to survive the pruning, but they're not able simply to grow a new bud at the end of the branch and continue where they left off. What happens instead is that the shrub has potential growth buds already within the stem at the points where, under usual circumstances, the leaves emerge. These diagrams show firstly a leaf and dormant bud on a rose, and secondly the brown scar on the stem once the leaf has fallen in the autumn, and the round raised bud just above it. While the bud at the top of the stem is alive, it suppresses the ones directly below, pulling the sap right to the top, taking all the food and energy. On a real rosebush, these dormant buds are clearly visible on the stem. When the top growing point is removed, one or more of the lower buds are then freed up to break out of the stem and develop into shoots, and so the plant continues to grow. The final diagram shows that the bud has grown and developed its own leaves and eventually will have flowers. We have seen that removing the dominant bud, the one right at the top, causes side shoots to grow from the buds below the cut. Exactly how many buds break varies from plant to plant, but what can be generalised is that across a given species, the reaction to pruning will be consistent, meaning that your hydrangea will behave like anyone else's hydrangea as long as it's in good health and reasonably good situation, and it will behave the same every year. Specifically, hydrangeas have very obvious pairs of leaves at intervals up the stem, and when you prune, not surprisingly, both buds in the top pair of leaf joints will start to grow, so you then have two shoots replacing the one that you cut out. Whereas laurel has no visible buds. They are hidden deeper under the bark, but they're still there, and lots of new shoots quickly appear when a branch is cut. Again, for detailed information on the plant that you're interested in, I suggest good reference material and your own observation, including plants in parks and other people's gardens, as long as they've given you permission to peer closely. That way you get the desired result without the trial and error stage. As a general rule, cutting back or pinching out the leading bud will make a bushier plant, and you can take advantage of this reaction to encourage more flowering shoots. The second important point is that you influence the rate of regrowth by how far back you cut. And this is where people sometimes get a massive surprise. For example, you have a shrub that has grown unchecked for several years. It is now too large and you want to reduce it significantly. So, what do? The understandable temptation is to cut really low down, certainly to well less than half the original height, and to do so when the shrub is dormant in winter so that you can see what you are doing. The bad news is that either it will not recover at all from such drastic pruning, or you are likely to trigger seriously vigorous regrowth when the plant wakes up in spring, producing a cluster of tall, straight water shoots, often well over a metre long with larger than usual leaves. So you can accidentally end up with a shrub bigger than the one you started with when you were trying to cut it back. What is happening here is that the plant's root system has obviously not been reduced, so it simply is attempting to replace the lost capacity for photosynthesis through the leaves as quickly as possible. And the harder you cut back, the harder it tries to regrow. So if you want to reduce the overall size of a tree or shrub, you need to do it less dramatically, and then the plant will simply accept the reduction and continue growing at the normal rate because you're not triggering the same reaction. You can make positive use of this rapid regrowth effect for ornamental purposes with some shrubs, and we'll look at this in a later video, along with how to prune back and reduce the size successfully. If you have a shrub that is very old, tangled and overgrown, then you need to know whether or not you can cut it right back, almost to ground level, and see it start again. Here, there is no single answer, I'm afraid, and the best way to be sure is to look up the specific plant in a good book or a reputable website. However, if you're facing a shrub, secateurs in hand, and need some instant guidance, then it is always worth looking into the centre of the plant to see if you can see either visible buds or naturally occurring young shoots coming from the older stems low down. If you can, then the plant has the ability to regrow from buds in the stems lower down, and it is likely to do so after severe pruning. If the older wood is completely smooth with no buds or shoots, then it is definitely sensible to put down the tools and do some more research. Lavender will shoot happily from buds in the wood just a couple of years old. This photo shows where a bush has been cut back after flowering to remove the current year's growth and just a little bit more to keep it compact. There's a cluster of new shoots emerging just below the cut. However, if you look at this seriously old lavender bush, you can see that there is not a single bud or shoot growing from the old twisted stems hanging over the wall. All the new growth is at the far ends, and there is precious little probability of the plant regrowing back if you cut it near to the ground. By contrast, the well-established hardy hibiscus that you see in this photograph has plenty of young growth on the branches of the main framework, so this gives confidence that new branches will develop after pruning. One warning though, if you are relying on the fact that you can see new shoots on old wood to decide how to prune, it is wise not to cut lower than the lowest emerging bud. This way you know that you are retaining a live shoot and are not cutting back beyond the limit of that particular plant. Be aware too that if a tree or shrub is already struggling in bad health, then extreme pruning may be enough to kill it, even if in theory that species does have viable buds in the mature wood. So there we are. I have talked about the 3 things that help you understand how plants react to pruning: how they grow and survive pruning at all, how quickly they regrow, and how far back or low down you can cut and still have the plant survive. And the short answers are: trees and shrubs have growing points at the tips of each twig, and cutting back encourages more buds to break lower down. The further you cut back, the more strongly and quickly the plant will regrow, and not all trees and shrubs have buds that can produce shoots from the oldest wood. And we are now just about at the end of part 1, and you know what pruning is. We have answered the 2 key questions: why are you pruning, with the 6 different objectives, and how plants react so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. These are the cornerstones of pruning. A final thought before we take a break. I highly recommend wandering around the garden with a mug of tea to take a fresh look at the trees and shrubs and decide what you want from each. Are they recently planted and need just formative guiding and tweaking for the next couple of years? Do you want to reshape more dramatically? Are you looking at recovering a neglected garden? And remember that each tree or shrub needs annual housekeeping to keep it healthy. When you come back and are ready to view the video for part 2, we will be looking in more detail at how to prune young plants into the desired shape and maintain small trees and shrubs as they mature. And you'll learn which is the best season for pruning. See you soon.